It's the Federal Bureau of Resistance. I'm Jessica Denson, and this is Lights On. I'm going to be joined in just a moment by a friend of the show, national security lawyer Bradley Moss. He is joining us straight out of the courthouse where he spent all day yesterday arguing with the federal government on behalf of his clients, the Federal Bureau of Investigation Agents Association, and 7 anonymous agents and other personnel of the Bureau who have been active in a lawsuit to prevent Donald Trump's Justice Department from disclosing the names of individuals who are participating in January 6th investigations or other investigations related to Donald Trump. There has been an active effort to try to put these agents at harm, to fire them, possibly retaliate against them. Of course, there have been purges of some of the top individuals at the FBI and the Washington, D.C. Bureau. And in the midst of all of this, the Federal Bureau of Investigations has been one of the strongest points of resistance against this illegal behavior. Just to highlight a few of the individuals, James Dennehy of the New York Bureau was very adamant with his staff. He told them that they are in the midst of a battle of their own and told them that now is the time to dig in. Likewise, Brian Driscoll, the accidental acting director of the FBI right now, resisted the efforts to publicize names of those individuals. And my guest today has a very important update to bring you from court as the result of his lawsuit. So I'm going to welcome him right now to the show. Welcome back after a long time. It's been too long. Brad Moss, welcome to Lights On.
Absolutely. Always happy to join.
You know, I enjoy having you on the show today, but I got to tell you, Brad, today I am particularly honored and just really proud of you, my friend, for being part of this. So thank you for that, first of all, for your work.
Of course. I mean, and a lot of the props also have to go to the entire legal team. This is a group effort by a number of, legal legends, Norm Eisen, who led the arguments, my boss, Mark Zaid, counsels for the FBI's Agent Association like Margaret Donovan, as well as Abby Lowell, who also has been providing his time. It is a group effort. It is a joint effort to protect these individuals who performed their duties in respect to lawful orders and investigated and provide information to prosecutors to potentially bring charges for what occurred back on January 6th. Their privacy deserves to be protected.
I was reading your lawsuit, Brad, and I mean, a couple things stood out to me. First of all, you cite the Constitution. Like one of the opening lines says, the court has jurisdiction because laws arise under the Constitution of the United States. And I was telling you before we started this that I led that protest back on January 3rd to 5th to try to get Congress to uphold their constitutional duty to our Constitution. And to me, it was just a threshold issue. And the fact that we're dealing with all of these violations of the Constitution as a fallout of that original failure to uphold the Constitution and keep this insurrectionist out of office. I mean, you quoted from the January 6th committee. I want to read this just so we get back to basics about why it is so dangerous to have a disqualified insurrectionist sitting in the Oval Office. You quoted, it says, the events of January 6, 2021 marked the most significant assault on the Capitol since the War of 1812. The building was desecrated, blood was shed, and several individuals lost their lives. Approximately 140 law enforcement officers were injured, and one officer who had been attacked died the next day. In the aftermath, workers labored to sweep up broken glass, wipe away blood, and clean feces off the walls. Portions of the building's historic architecture were damaged or destroyed. And of course, your clients were engaged in the rightful investigation and carrying out of the law to rectify these violations of our sacred institution and the peaceful transfer of power. And they are now facing retaliation from the very men who incited this insurrection. Brad, it's really unthinkable.
Yeah, I mean, the entire situation we find ourselves in, we always talk about uncharted waters, unprecedented territory. There has been nothing like this before in arguably the modern history of this republic, let alone the republic in general. What Richard Nixon did in the 70s looks like child's play compared to what Donald Trump has done, how he has abused the system, how he has and is systematically just dismantling all the guardrails, all the protections we put in place over decades, over generations, to ensure no one man or woman can basically rule over the entirety of the U.S. government and make decisions by decree. This is a republic with three separate and what are supposed to be co-equal branches of government, and Donald Trump has made clear he doesn't really care about that idea. He wants to just run this the way he ran his businesses, most of which went bankrupt, but he wants to run it where he says an order and there's no one who's allowed to stop him. And so far, Congress has been willing to go along. Obviously, he has a Republican majority, both the House and the Senate. They're very much going to be compliant with his desires, but there's still a judiciary. And for the moment, especially this week, with a number of different cases, the judiciary has pushed back on some of the excesses of this administration.
I want to name just some of those excesses in regards to your lawsuit, and then talk about what you achieved in court over the last couple of days. You name what happened on January 27th, when the administration fired more than a dozen prosecutors who worked on special counsel Jack Smith's team. Upon information and belief, and supported by many reports, it appears that acting leadership at the DOJ has begun steps towards the mass unlawful termination of Bureau employees who had any involvement in certain investigations related to Trump. This could be as many as 6,000 employees who may be currently targeted for unlawful firing. You say it's, quote, catastrophic to national security. On last Sunday, February 2nd, the defendants, meaning the United States, the Department of Justice, ordered certain FBI agents to answer a questionnaire, which you, of course, reference, about their work on cases related to the events of January 6th. The survey was titled Acting Department a DAG memo response, events that occurred at or near the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021. And they have planned to publicize these names and or retaliate or terminate based on the responses to this questionnaire. So I understand from what you've been in court on all day yesterday and your consent agreement today that you have progress to report to us. Can you tell us about that?
Sure, yes. So the original lawsuit was just filed a few days ago, which ordinarily would mean that we would be weeks, if not months, away from having any kind of hearing, let alone real substantive movement in federal civil litigation. But what the legal team did, we filed what is called a motion for a temporary restraining order, which is basically seeking immediate emergency relief to more or less freeze the status quo, prevent the defendant government agency, as well as the U.S. government as an entirety, from taking further steps that would run afoul of what we're trying to stop in general with this lawsuit. We were before Judge Cobb in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia yesterday, pretty much all day. There was extensive amount of argument, both from obviously our side, representing numerous FBI personnel, all of who are John and Jane Does. Their identities have been allowed to remain anonymous, as well as the FBI Agent Association. Of course, the government was represented by government lawyers, many of whom are really probably worried themselves about the extent to which they will have jobs in the upcoming weeks or months. But at the moment, they have to represent the interests of the U.S. government. Wow. And what it came down to, and what we were able to finalize today, thankfully, was an agreement between the parties. We described it as a consent order, basically binding the U.S. government as a whole to not disseminate to the public any of the information from these lists that have been compiled by the Bureau and by the Justice Department of the information of these individuals who responded to the questionnaires, their names, their locations, what work they did, their position titles. The government is prohibited from disseminating that information outside the boundaries of the U.S. government unless it provides us with 48 hours notice. And by that, I mean 2 business days, not 2 calendar days, but 2 business days notice if it chooses to move forward to publication. If it gives us that notice, we can then revive the temporary restraining order and go back to court to halt it in its entirety.
Interesting. Okay, so I know that was part of the ask, and part of the cause of action is violation of the Privacy Act. You cited 5 USC 552. You also cited the violation of Administrative Procedure Act 5 USC 706. Now, when I was reading this, I thought, my God, Brad, this sounds like so many things that are going on right now are probably in violation of this Administrative Procedure Act. It says, under the APA, a court shall hold unlawful and set aside agency action found to be arbitrary, capricious, and abuse of discretion, or otherwise not in accordance with law, contrary to constitutional right, power, privilege, or immunity, without observance of procedure required by law. So in your lawsuit in particular, and if you want to comment on anything else going on in the government, I'd be happy to have your insight. But in your lawsuit in particular, what are the other remedies long-term that you want to get out of this for your clients?
So in the end, what the entire purpose of this lawsuit is to make sure that those names never come out. They're not supposed to come out. By and large, the names of rank and file FBI personnel, basically anyone who's not a political appointee and who's not like a Senate confirmed or extremely high level senior official, those names are rarely put forward to the public unless they're in actual court filings. It's the prosecutor who files the case, and it's the FBI agents who testified on the public record in the trial. Those individuals' names come out in that context. But the overwhelming majority of FBI personnel, their identities are anonymous for the simple reason that they're not public-facing individuals. They're standard civil servants. They go to work, they do their job, they go home, they feed their kids, and they go to bed. And the law, federal law, the Privacy Act, and arguably the Freedom of Information Act protect that privacy of those individuals. The government routinely fights us on disclosing the identities of FBI or other agency personnel based off their own privacy interests in the absence of a finding of misconduct. That was the irony of yesterday, and we were on the other side of the equation, that we were the ones trying to protect the identities of these individuals, and the government is the one looking to find a way to put them out there so Elon Musk and his lackeys can just, go on doxing them and, making their lives hell. What we have seen and what we're going to continue to see for a while, to be candid, with what Elon Musk and his Doge kids are doing, is they're pushing the boundaries of everything they can. It's very much a move fast and break stuff, knowing that for lawyers, we have a much more methodical approach we have to do to bring things in court. It takes a lot more time to try to put the pieces back together than it does for them to break them in the first place. So there's going to be a lot of damage done before we can ever put this back together. It's just the reality of the system and the way it is. But you have seen various pushback from the courts. The birthright executive order was put on hold. The funding freeze was put on hold. The fork in the road resignation deal was put on hold yesterday. And as we're talking this evening, earlier today, there was a hearing with respect to the USAID firings and a temporary restraining order on that front. The courts are immediately trying to address this, if only to address to what extent they have to freeze the situation until the parties can litigate the merits. For our situation, the ultimate, goal is to keep this information private so it doesn't go public in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. I think something I read really talked about the effectiveness of TROs right now, in particular with litigation. Like, we have to be, the litigants have to be doing exactly what you're doing and asking for temporary restraining orders, because that's the fastest way to get results out of the judiciary as these unthinkable assaults are going on. But, as you were talking, I was thinking about this article that I was reading called "The Federal Bureau of Resistance." What I opened the show with, this is a piece from Chris Smith out of Vanity Fair, and it says, Donald Trump and Elon Musk are trying to dismantle multiple federal agencies, and no one seems capable of pushing back. Enter a nascent FBI rebellion. And he quoted from Daniel Rickman, at the Columbia University law professor. He said, and a former federal prosecutor, he said, it's a strong organization that isn't likely to be cowed. Part of the reason why people become agents and prosecutors is because they hate bullies. And when presented with an effort to bully them, I don't think they're going to run away. That really is the spirit of your clients, isn't it?
Correct. Absolutely. I mean, these are individuals across the Bureau who deal with any number of types of criminals across the United States government and internationally. They're dealing with drug traffickers, sex traffickers. They're dealing with white collar criminals, fraudsters. They're dealing with any number of types of people who engage in any rather violent or non-violent types of criminal offenses. They don't cower amongst those individuals, and they're certainly not going to cower to this, criminal felon who's sitting in the White House because, of course, this is the way our Constitution worked, and there was nothing to prevent him from doing so, according to the Supreme Court. Doesn't mean that they're going to always be able to win. There are some of these legal battles that no matter how good all of us lawyers are, we might lose. But the goal here, the priority here has to remain to push back wherever we can and to stop as much of this unlawful and unconstitutional behavior that we can. There's a number of lawyers across the spectrum who are doing so. We have to continue doing that to ensure one way or the other, if we survive these next 4 years, that the rule of law still means something and it's not just whatever Donald Trump wants it to be on a given day.
Yeah, I mean, here on Lights On, I advocate for going back to the original issue, which Donald Trump is disqualified. And I honestly, Brad, I hope to see litigation based on the 14th Amendment, based on his illegal inhabitation of that office, because he doesn't matter that he's there, he still has no constitutional authority to be there. And my legal understanding, I don't know if you want to comment, is that any action that he takes is invalid in and of itself based on his disqualification from office. I hope some lawyers have the courage to bring forward litigation like that.
So unfortunately, according to the Supreme Court, the only individuals who have standing to bring that type of challenge is the United States Congress itself. That's what the ultimate decision was coming out of the Anderson ruling from the Supreme Court back last spring, dealing with disqualifying Donald Trump from the Colorado ballot. In essence, they concluded that only Congress can implement the, Clause 3 or Clause 3. Section 3 of Article 14 dealing with disqualification. And of course, there's no reason to believe that the existing majorities are going to pursue that, even if Democrats were to say retake the House or the Senate in the midterms. It's questionable if they have the political desire to pursue that particular course. I think we certainly would expect, if they do so, to see endless hearings investigating what Elon Musk has done, to investigate these little kids running around. They have access to your social security numbers, your bank accounts, your IRS data, everything. And when asked about it today, Donald Trump didn't really have much of a response about why these 23-year-olds have access to that, other than, I don't know, but it was really easy. Yeah, because he ordered them to have access. And that's the scary part, is that these kids are running around. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're dealing with, but they're running around doing whatever Elon and Donald Trump say to do. And that is going to be the subject of oversight hearings after the midterms if Democrats retake either part of Congress.
Well, Brad, we did extensive reporting for about a month with constitutional scholars on why Donald Trump, in fact, remains disqualified, and all of the references to litigation or to new congressional legislation are just dicta in that Supreme Court decision. I always refer back to William Bowd and Michael Paulson, who are the preeminent scholars, Federalist Society folks, who are leading authority on Section 3. And they said if Section 3 is swept under the rug, it will not be because it is what Trump v. Anderson requires, let alone what the Constitution requires. So I understand it's an uphill battle, but Donald Trump remains disqualified as we speak. I won't ask you to dig into too much more of that with me, because I know you have to go, but I am so, like I said, so incredibly proud of you, so honored to have you as a friend. And I really appreciate that your work you're doing at this unbelievable time that we're living through. Thank you so much for your service, Brad.
Of course. And thank you for what you do, and keep doing that. Keep bringing awareness to all these issues, because one way or the other, that's the only way we can, truly fight back, is to continue to spread awareness of what's going on and give insight to the public.
Absolutely. Thank you, my friend. We'll see you next time.
Of course.
So, yeah, I am so grateful to have Brad here. It's been too long, and I do believe that it's incredibly important, the actions that are being taken right now through the courts. I think that just like they are throwing shit at the fan from every angle to try to dismantle our democracy and our republic from within, we have to be countering them constantly with every avenue, with peaceful protests like we've been reporting here on Lights On, like litigation. I encourage you to go to justsecurity.org. Just Security is keeping a ledger of all of the litigation that is going on against Donald Trump and Elon Musk and all of their illegal attempts to violate our constitutional rights and dismantle our republic. As Brad was speaking, I was reminded of another egregious action this week, which was the White House, in keeping with a most likely illegal executive order, receiving an unclassified email from the CIA with names of the agency's new hires. Now, this includes names of people who are being trained to be new undercover trainees. It could expose the identities of those officers to foreign government hackers. This is a very, very dangerous thing, and just another thing that amplifies how reckless the actions of this White House are. This came in compliance with an executive order to downsize the federal workforce. Of course, they're doing a lot of things in the name of DEI, in the name of so-called cutting off waste and abuse, when in fact it is the most wasteful, the most abusive, the most tailored to enrich the richest man in the world at the expense of the disenfranchised and poorest people in the world. And when I say that, I'm thinking in particular what's going on with USAID, the disgusting dismantling or attempt to dismantle USAID and all the work that they do for countries around the world, for peoples around the world that need the help most. And in fact, us doing that work enriches and strengthens us. It's a mutually beneficial operation. It's not like we're just giving up our resources to others. It's building up us because we're doing the right thing to support these other countries in need and peoples in need in the most dire situation. So that the notion that USAID is wasteful is really, really sick, coming from someone like Elon Musk and Donald Trump. As I'm talking about this, I'm thinking about something that's really close to my heart, and that's animal welfare. And there was a really disgusting story this week out of Italy. I don't know if you heard it, where Donald Trump Jr. was shooting birds, endangered birds. I think we've had stories like this from the first administration in violation of Italian law. And I genuinely hope that we are not the only ones in this country enforcing the laws that are broken by these criminals, but that the Italians as well don't cower to this sick man who takes delight in killing beautiful creatures. So I would love to see some action from the Italian government as well. I wanted to highlight one other story that I think, again, just shows you the cruelty, the absolute depravity of this administration, that nobody has to be behind, whether you call yourself Republican, conservative, Democrat, progressive, man, woman. This is basic human cruelty or inhuman cruelty that these people are engaged in. This is Admiral Linda Fagan. There was reporting coming out of NBC News from Courtney Cubie and Jonathan Allen yesterday about Admiral Lyndon Fagan. Now, let me tell you her story. She was a 4-star admiral and the first woman to lead a branch of the military. Now, in Donald Trump's "let me make an example of anybody that I can try to attach to a DEI initiative," he fired her on day 2 of his administration. He fired her. And it was a little bit easier for her to be fired because it was not as difficult to fire her as it would have to dismiss one of the chiefs of the 4 main branches of the military. So because she was in the Coast Guard, it was a little easier for him to fire her. And he did that on day 2 of his administration. Now, of course, Admiral Linda Fagan is someone who has put in years, decades of service to this country. She is absolutely beyond qualified for the post that she held, but he used her as an example. He tried to use this honorable, esteemed, accomplished woman and hero for our country as an example by firing her on day 2. Now, here's what happened this week. This week, she was literally evicted. She was literally evicted from her house at Joint Base Anacostia Bowling with 3 hours notice. She had been given 60 days. She had been given 60 days to leave after she was fired. But this week on Tuesday, she was given 3 hours notice, not even enough time to gather her personal effects, and told to vacate her home. Homeland Security officials told the acting commandant, Kevin Lunday, that he had to kick her out because, quote, the president wants her out of her quarters, according to one of the people familiar with the incident. What a sickness. What a cruelty. On every single level, this administration is trying to intimidate people, trying to make an example of people, trying to scare and discourage and dishearten the American public. Let's, instead of being scared or discouraged, continue to rise up with every disgusting act of cruelty. Let us react with our love for this country, our refusal to stand down, our willingness to use every legal lever at our disposal to stop this, and to stop this now. You know, on Lights On that I have been laser focused on action, and I did a couple of extra episodes this week, which I highly encourage you to go back and watch. The first one was on Monday with Andrea Chalupa and Carlos Alvarez Araños to announce those amazing protests that I got wind of this week. 50 states, 50 protests. Those are incredible conversations that I had with both of them. So encouraging, so uplifting, such a reminder of the little tiny men, not to mention actual tiny men when you talk about the kids at Doge who were up against. And then on Wednesday, we brought you footage from several of those protests from the people who were involved with us in 14th Now. They were around the country, that we have not given up this fight at all. We are continuing to be engaged on every front. And several of them joined me from Los Angeles, Indianapolis, Denver, Raleigh, North Carolina, to report on the beautiful showing of patriotism for this country. I just have a suggestion. If you're going to continue to be engaged in these protests, and I hope you are, this is just the beginning. We started it with 14th Now. It was continued this week, and we are far from done. Show up with American flags. Like, let's bring the American flag back and really use it for its intended purpose of patriotism and courage and honoring the sacrifices, and not let it be hijacked by Donald Trump and his anti-American Russian asset cabal. Let's take back the American flag. So if you go to any more protests, bring an American flag with you. I want to announce a few more protests that I am aware of right now. One is on February 17th. It's kind of like a Not My President, President's Day protest. Carlos at American Opposition, who was on the show on Monday and Wednesday, announced it the other day. He said he did it in honor of us because we have led the movement with 14th Now to explain to everybody why Donald Trump is in fact disqualified. He is not a legitimate president. By the way, if you want to go back and review and have this understanding, I think it's really important to keep this at the forefront of why Donald Trump is an illegitimate president and remains disqualified. Go to nowmarch.org and click on the legal authority page. That gives you a invaluable resource for understanding why Trump is disqualified, why any arguments to the contrary, saying that Trump v. Anderson requires congressional action or anything else. It totally debunks all of those arguments with the top constitutional scholars in this country, with interviews, with scholarly reviews. Read that, watch that, understand. Be educated, because there's a lot of people out there in the pro-democracy space and in the congressional space that would try to still tell their audience and their constituents that they didn't have the ability to block this presidency. And the fact of the matter is 100% they did. And it was their constitutional obligation to do that. So go to nowmarch.org, visit the legal authority page, keep that as like a forever reference to where we are and how we got here. I've seen some commentary this week about, I think on CNN, a political commentator said, the Democrats have to educate their base about how we got here. And I'm like, wow. If the Democrats educate their base about how we got here, they're really going to be exposing themselves and what cowards they were, because that is how we got here. And it's not, of course, just the Democrats. The Republicans are and continue to be grossly complicit in this hijacking of our democracy. But the Democrats, with their platitudes to the contrary, had the opportunity to at least raise their voice, even if they weren't successful, to at least raise their voice on January 6th. And then they would have credibility right now. I saw Raphael Warnock this week on with Lawrence O'Donnell, just for a clip. I don't usually watch too much of that, but I was listening, overhearing, and I really have so appreciated in the past Raphael Warnock. He is, I genuinely believe he is a genuine man of faith. I so appreciate that gravitas of spiritual motivation and understanding that brought him to come and want to be a senator. But he was talking about he had kind of a self-reflective tone about Democrats needing to understand, or just leaders in general like him needing to look at themselves to see if they've been doing what's necessary in this moment. And so my message to Raphael Warnock and to any Democrat is that you genuinely failed us. And if you want to start to regain your credibility and not have your legacy be blood on your hands, the blood of democracy on your hands, first of all, acknowledge your failure on January 6th. Acknowledge that Donald Trump is disqualified. Acknowledge that even if you weren't successful, you had a lever to at least implore your colleagues and invoke the Constitution on that day. And instead, you let the coup continue. You let this man come into office who would then pardon the people who threatened the investigators who did their lawful duty. People who were sentenced, Enrique Tarrio, sentenced to 22 years in prison, is now a free man out threatening FBI agents. I didn't have time with Brad Moss, but one of the things that they reference in their lawsuit is how he called for the arrest of Special Agent Nicole Miller, who was involved in his case. And they have these groups on X and other places, other platforms, to try to encourage the intimidation and retaliation against the law enforcement officers who did their jobs. All because we illegally put the man who incited them to insurrection back in the White House. All of this was foreseeable. So Senator Warnock and every one of your colleagues, I hope you really do have that spirit of introspection and repentance, and that repentance leads you to some serious action right now. There's a quote that someone shared with me from Samuel Adams that I really loved on the last show that I put up. It says, "It does not take a majority to prevail, but rather an irate, tireless minority keen on setting brush fires of freedom in the minds of men." Irate, tireless. Irate and tireless. Imagine if we had, I've been telling my team that's been fighting against the Trump campaign for years, that I have been successful in. I've always told them, if we need to use, they throw everything at the wall with lies, with hate, with deception, with projection, with gaslighting. If we could just have the same spirit, but with the truth, with the law, with principle, with not being willing to move from that standpoint, have that same spirit, but with all of the right qualities underlying it, that cannot be defeated. That is incredible power. So we need to always be minded to employ every resource we can imagine and that we can imagine, and pray for that divine guidance for things that you can't humanly conceive of. Because I guarantee There's things beyond our very limited concepts that are there for us to be doing right now, and we need to be thinking in those directions. One other protest that I'm aware of upcoming is on March 15th. It's a blackout day, blackout not to shop, not to travel, not to patronize anything, get off social media, just a complete, don't go to work, complete blackout day. So I think that's a little bit far ahead to be planning, but if you're planning any travel, let's try to honor March 15th as a day that we won't fly, we won't engage in any consumerism at all, just a complete blackout, March 15th. So February 17th, President's Day for the next Not My President's Day March, March 15th, total blackout. Another idea that I think this country needs to get really comfortable with is labor strikes. And I'll be looking, I know some of you have suggested that to me and suggested I do more reporting. I'll definitely be doing more research on my end, but the labor movements I think really need to be thinking about getting involved. We need to normalize, not normalize an illegal president sitting in that office for 4 more years, stealing our personal information and giving it to these kids who are controlled by the world's richest man, who are trying to take over this country and have a dictatorship of billionaires and no legitimate election again. We can't think about surviving this for 4 years. We have to normalize the conversation about ending it now. So thank you, everybody, so much for joining me today. I'm doing a little bit of a shorter show, but I wanted to accommodate Brad in his schedule and bring him to you with that incredible update straight from the courthouse. Thank you so much to the people who are putting in the work, the American people showing up in the streets, the lawyers being courageous. Congress, get your friggin' act together. The blood of democracy right now is on your hands, and you have an opportunity to do some self-reflection and possibly change that. So we're here and we're waiting. If you want to support this show, you can go to thejessicadenson.com/donate, thejessicadenson.com/donate. Also, please, most important is to subscribe to the Jessica Denson YouTube channel where you're watching this. Please share the show. Please share the action points that we're bringing you. This is, I think, a very unique space that we have here on Lights On, and with this incredible audience that I have with you for sharing what needs to be done and the action that we can take. So please subscribe to the Jessica Denson YouTube channel and tell your friends, family, anyone you know about it. You can also support me by going to thejessicadenson.com or following the link in this description to buy my merch. I love this mug. Stand Out. The Lights On with Jessica Denson Stand Out mug is there. Also, hats, shirts, and hoodies are there on the Lights On merch site. So you can support me in that way as well. As always, stay strong, stay in the light, take care of yourself first. Don't forget that. Don't forget that. You got to put your mask on before you help the person sitting next to you. That's really, really important right now, to take care of yourself. And with that power of loving yourself and honoring yourself, we will be best empowered to help each other. So don't forget that, okay? All right. I love you guys so much. Thank you for being with me today. And as always, let your light shine.